The engine assembled, and I'm just showing you the left hand side of it here from the last video that you might have seen. You can see that I haven't put the gear on yet, but you can also see that I haven't put the gauze on the top of this pipe. That's yet to be done, but that is the engine as it's been assembled. These are the other components that I need to put together. So you can see the completed engine on the left hand, well, not the completed engine, but the clean engine on the left hand side, and the components on the right hand side that I need to put together. I've got the push rods here, push rod tubes in the covers. I have the drive assembly here. I have the sump plate, and I have the gasket that fits underneath the. It's under this section here, which feeds the oil pumps. I've got the barrel. I've got the pistons. I've got the guides, and then I've got the cylinder head itself here. And so they're all the components that I need, and I'll just walk through now how I actually put them all together. Again, that's the right hand side of the engine. I've now put the piston onto it. I've got new circlip rings, always put new circlip rings in it. I've put in new rings. The rings, I have checked the thickness, I have checked the gaps between the ring and the piston. Before I put the rings in, I also put the rings into the barrel to make sure I've got enough gap when it's actually compressed. I did have to mess about with a couple of the rings, but again, that's something you just need to do on a trial basis, and you have to put it in, see if it fits, and if not, get a different one. Luckily, the rings that I had in stock were able to fit into the piston, and I was quite comfortable with the way that it all fitted together. Again, these are the components laid out slightly differently. The next parts that I'm going to be looking at will obviously I put the barrel on here, and I put a new gasket at the bottom of it, so that's all put together. I'll then start to put the tubes in and the valve followers. The cylinder head had not been looked at properly, and you can see huge quantities of gasket sealant on here. And again, in theory, you shouldn't need that, because the combustion chamber seals on the inner surface here. And these surfaces here will need some sealant for oil returns, but it doesn't need anything like as much as this. But I just wanted to show the condition of some of the projects that we receive into the workshop. That was it, cleaned and roughly scuffed up to see what the condition was. The valves looked in really good condition, as did the seats, and I took them out, put them back in again, lapped them, and they seemed in good condition. But you can see there's still quite a lot of pitting in this surface here. This will be okay with some sealant, but this surface here I was concerned about, because that's where the combustion seals. I wasn't too much worried about the pitting in this area, which is the combustion chamber itself, but the sealing area I wanted to clean up. So I did polish it up a bit, but you can still see we've got some quite large pits here. The pits in the combustion chamber themselves aren't too bad. These will seal with a very, very basic gasket, but I needed to make sure I had some kind of a good solid copper gasket that would fill in these gaps. I was going to go and skim it, but then what I found was that would have caused me some clearance issues with the valves, and so what I felt that I needed to do is to put a suitable gasket in that section. So I chose a thicker copper gasket to put in there, fully annealed of course, and that made sure I didn't have any over compression issues, and make sure that the bike was going to run reliably and wasn't going to then start to cause me problems later on. These are the tops of the cylinder head on the valve side of things. Again, I took all the valves out and the springs, checked the length of the springs. One was 0.1 of a millimeter longer than the other, but in reality there wasn't too much of a difference for me to worry about, so I kept the same springs. The collets, I replaced the collets, but I probably didn't need to. I just had spare collets, so I decided to put them in there. And that is you can see here the rebuilt cylinder head, clean cylinder head, and these are the gasket cover, the rocker cover itself, and this part here sits on the top of here, and that just covers over the top of it. So that's my cylinder head, all nicely shiny and all nicely clean. And again, I stoned the tops of them to make sure that the mating surfaces were flat and true, and I had a good chance of sealing. This is the engine on the ramp. You can see that I left the gearbox in it. The gearbox was running fine, it selected fine. I wanted to make sure that the gearbox linkages were in good condition. And when you just rotate the back wheel, you can see it clicking in quite nicely. The clutch works well. I've got another video that shows the disassembly of the clutch, but that clutch is in good condition. The plates and the friction pads were all of the right thickness, and everything worked well in that area. The only issue that I tend to see in these gearboxes are that the indents are not in the right place, and the adjustment on the gear lever arm means that the gear lever indents, where the gear lever wants to sit naturally, like for example in position of second gear, they may not match where the gearbox wants to sit in the indents there. It is a bit of a laborious task to actually get those slick, but they will solve most of your gearbox problems if you have if you don't have too much. If you've got a major problem with the gearbox, that's not going to fix it. But a lot of the issues you have with these things jumping out of gear is simply because people haven't lined up the indents correctly on the gearbox itself and on the hand gear change. So there's my engine. I've put all the bits and pieces back together. I've got new fibre washers for the oil feeds here. I've got a new felt washer for the top there, and again on the other side there. I've left the original screws. I put some other screws into the top of the engine housing, but you know, it didn't look right, and they were nice and shiny, and I knew they were good, but really, you know, this bike is a bike that's 70, 80 years old, and it needed to, you know, to look the part. And so I put the old screws back in and made sure that they were in good condition. When you put the head on, you need to make sure that the valve lifter arm is in the right position. You can change it afterwards. You can see this little arm that hangs down here. You can take it off and put it back on again, but it has a cam and a pin, and if you don't get it lined up correctly, it can be a bit awkward to actually get it so that it will lift the valve properly. It's better to do it right the first time than try to fix it later, and so when you're actually putting it together, take care when you're putting this together. This disc is just a cap on the top of it, and these bolts are obviously running straight the way through into here. You just need to make sure that they are tightened into the body first before you put those in, but you need to make sure that they aren't pulling out of the head. Some people have torqued these in far too much in the past, and sometimes you'll see some helicoil work going on there, so be very, very careful about any work around these areas. But these studs looked in good condition, and I was able to put the new studs in the top and new nuts, and they went in really well. Right hand side of the engine again here, you can see I've left these tubes up. These tubes get pulled up so that you can then put the valves that run on the cams, sorry, the followers that run on the cams run up and down, and then they have the push rods that actually operate the rockers themselves, and the adjustments made at the bottom. So you slide these tubes up out the way and make the adjustments. So I've just left them there for the moment. I have put the cams in just to make sure I've actually got the things together, but I'll take them off and show you how to adjust those, set those properly later on. But I just wanted to make sure I got everything pulled together to make sure that when the top end was assembled, that it was all good. So these are all the fish plates and the holders. Obviously I wanted to make sure they were flat, straight, clean, and so I pulled them all apart. This is how I got them, and I'll put them back together after painting them and straightening them. They tend to get bashed and battered, as you can imagine, but they're just simple pieces of plate, and it's very simple to then make new ones if you have a problem, but making sure you got the holes in the right place is absolutely critical. Fitting the engine itself is very straightforward with those fish plates, because you just lift the engine in and you then put the fish plates on as you deem fit. I put the engine in from the left hand side. I know some people say you should do it the other way around, but it really depends on which way is easiest for you, and you just then make sure that it's bolted up correctly. You've got the bolts in all the right holes, and they've got especially in this fish plate here, you will find the bolt lengths are slightly different. So it's wise to fit these plates onto the engine as a trial fit beforehand, so you're not messing about trying to screw nuts onto non-existent threads.